Spiritual Direction from Dante, a book by Father Paul Pearson of the Oratory. Canto 2. Topics: Giving up hope that we can be different, and isolation in our battle. Who are we to think that we can be different from what we presently are? And who are we to think that we're being called to something infinitely greater than ourselves? Given our previous experience of trying to improve ourselves, anyone with any personal honesty would give up before even starting. But still, God seems to call. The 8th Psalm, 4th verse says, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" It all seems to be beyond us, a task in which we are bound to fail. And there is something true in that fear. It is beyond our powers. But we are not asked to perform these tasks alone. God's help will be with us each step of the way. When we face our judgment at the end of our life, we will acknowledge all the wrong we've done. But we will also have to admit to all the good we failed to do through fear and cowardice. How much more could we have done, or how much more could we have been, if only we'd not been afraid, if we had trusted in the power of God's constant help? And no matter how overwhelming it may seem, God calls us to holiness, to a life shared with the Blessed Trinity in the splendor of heaven. And all things are possible for God. In line 10, Dante is concerned with his unworthiness to undertake his journey. It is unclear whether his concern comes from true humility or is merely another manifestation of his fear. When we are afraid, we often make excuses as to why we should not do the thing we fear. He calls to mind those who, while still alive, have made such journeys before him. Aeneas's journey to the underworld, St. Paul's being taken up into heaven. And who is he to compare with Aeneas, the founder of Rome, or St. Paul, the apostle of the Gentiles? But even more than this, Dante wants to be reassured by Virgil that what he is about to do is really possible. Is there hope to complete this journey? Not merely in the abstract, but for Dante in particular. And he says, if I should enter on this quest, I fear it would be mad and foolish. This canto, in many ways, is a continuation of Dante's reflection upon the power of fear in our lives. And the only effective remedy for that fear are the virtues of courage and hope. It is not enough to believe that heaven is our goal and that forgiveness and purification are required to attain it. That faith is necessary, but not sufficient for entering the spiritual journey. If we are to be more than Don Quixotes, tilting at windmills and dreaming impossible dreams, we need some reassurance that we, with all our weaknesses and imperfections, can reach the end of the journey. But do we trust that what God is asking of us is really, truly possible? Will we be provided with whatever is necessary to overcome the obstacles in our way? This hope, as Dante's discussion with Virgil will show, is more than whistling in the dark or the power of positive thinking. It is founded on something real, solid, and intensely personal. Dante describes beautifully the psychology of fear, self-doubt, and second thoughts. He says, as a man who unwills what he wills, changing his plan for every little thought, till he withdraws from any kind of start. When faced with a difficulty, we find that any little consideration can be turned into a reason for giving up. The gears of the mind merely spin without gaining any real traction. We vacillate from one option to another until it seems almost impossible to decide anything at all. We become paralyzed with indecision, for thinking ate away the enterprise, as Dante says. The reality of our struggle can destroy our fledgling hope in an instant, changing our confidence into indecision. But Virgil doesn't let Dante off easily or allow him to save face. He correctly identifies the problem, and a humiliating one it is: cowardice. Like a horse that refuses to make the jump, we let our lack of courage stand in the way of what we know needs to be done. Philosophers speak of the irascible appetite, the power where the virtue of courage is supposed to dwell. It is the desiring power that fights battles by accepting what is painful or difficult when it is necessary, or by turning away from pleasures when they are not truly helpful for us. In our world, this power to fight for what is right tends to be woefully under-exercised. It's restless inside and squirming for the chance to do what it was intended to do. Think of the people who get addicted to extreme sports or risky behaviors because of the thrill they feel at those moments. They feel alive for a change. Courage is an essential part of who we are as human beings. We cannot be fully happy without courage working in our irascible appetite. But it often happens that this power, out of weakness or indulgence, lets us down precisely when we need to fight battles or undertake those difficult tasks. How many opportunities have been wasted in the life of each of us? We all have worldly opportunities we regret having allowed to pass us by. The sports team for which we never tried out, the traveling we never did, the business enterprise that we rejected as too risky. Our lives have been lived under the wet blanket of fear, imprisoning our heroic desires and making them no more than ineffectual daydreams. And the same is true for our spiritual lives. We often know what needs to be done, and we might even have a desire to do it, but fear stands in the way. Fear of failing, fear of appearing odd or fanatical, fear of losing out on the pleasure the world has to offer. Perhaps this is what St. John Paul II had in mind when he repeated so frequently that it became almost his trademark. He said, "Be not afraid. Do not turn away from a glorious enterprise. We are created for something heroic. We are diminished as human beings if some share in that glorious enterprise is lacking in our lives." Virgil does not merely humiliate Dante by rubbing his nose in his cowardice. He puts before his eyes the promise of virtue, the promise of freedom. He says, "that you may slip this worry and go free." And step by step, Virgil takes Dante through the process of growing in courage. First, one must develop an honest recognition of the problem. And second, we must train ourselves to hate what the sins do to us and desire the possibility of life being different. Finally, we must develop hope that what we are considering is really possible for us. In order to strengthen Dante's hope, Virgil tells Dante the story of how he got involved in Dante's case. This way, Dante will see what strong heavenly support he has. He need not, and cannot, depend solely upon his own strength. As our world grows and becomes increasingly urban, it is paradoxical that many people experience a sort of loneliness that would have been foreign a previous generation. Although they seem to have little or no privacy, surrounded as they are by people most of the time, they still feel alone, left to struggle through life without support or encouragement. This might seem to be even more the case for those who dedicate themselves to a serious spiritual life in the secularized world of ours. Who really looks at life the way we do? We are strangers and sojourners in this world, citizens of another homeland. But a soul is never alone, never without assistance. Even when we do not perceive this assistance, it is nonetheless active in our lives. This is the least part of what we mean by the communion of saints. The saints and angels in heaven take an active interest in our lives. They are interceding for us and assisting us in ways that often remain hidden from us until we meet them in heaven. If we could live with an abiding sense of their loving concern, how different our lives would feel. That awareness is part of the amazing resilience of the saints. In line now 52, Virgil dwells in the circle of hell that Dante will visit in Canto 4. This circle, at least as envisioned by Dante, is inhabited by a rather surprising collection of souls. Dante calls this circle limbo, but as will be clearer when we read that canto, especially line 26, Dante's description of limbo is at least distinct from the Church's traditional teaching. Virgil is visited there by a soul from heaven, and this dialogue between them is filled with the language of chivalry, the knight going on a difficult and dangerous journey for his lady. And she is the one who asks Virgil to use his influence with Dante, whom she fears might be too far gone already, but she speaks not merely on her own authority. She has been sent by St. Lucy and the Blessed Virgin herself, and they are merely instruments of the divine love. The love that this Lady Beatrice, that the love that makes Beatrice bold to speak with Virgil might be, in part, her love for Dante, although she seems rather detached from him at the time. But since she is in heaven, it is more likely the love that she has for God and for the fulfillment of God's plan. She is there speaking to Virgil as an instrument of God's will. Like the good knight, Virgil replies graciously to Beatrice's requests, and he says, "It would be late had I obeyed already." Her will is his command. Is this because of her beauty, or because she is God's messenger? On line 88, our attention returns to the theme of fear and courage. Virgil is perplexed that someone from heaven would dare to venture into hell, or be allowed to do so even. Perhaps this is also a subtle dig at Dante, that Beatrice was not afraid to leave the glory of heaven and come down to hell. So why should he be afraid of leaving behind his wandering on earth to venture into hell? What we rightly fear are those things that truly do us harm. And Beatrice is free from any fear of hell because she's beyond being harmed by it. The suggestion is that what God has done for her, he will also do for Dante, and he will be protected every step of the way. Beatrice explains that it is not her own initiative that she comes, but that she does so at the Blessed Virgin's command. Note that neither Our Lady's name nor the name of our Lord is mentioned in hell. They are holy names and have no place here with souls who have turned away from the infinite good. It was the compassion of the Blessed Virgin herself that broke the rigid sentence from above. Her desire for Dante's spiritual well-being is perhaps surprising for those who imagine that the medieval mind was filled with extreme notions of divine justice. Dante did not picture that we need to negotiate with God, the Blessed Virgin, and the other saints in order to win them over to our side. They are on our side before we are, like the shepherd in search of a lost sheep, before the sheep either knows it is lost or wants to be found. She doesn't need to be begged. She is the one who sees the problem and moves the others to act. She is the initiator. St. Lucy is summoned by Our Lady to aid Dante. Your faithful follower now has need of you, and I give him over to your loving care, she says. And we suppose that Dante had a special devotion to St. Lucy, and we see here that our devotion to the saints is reciprocal. The communion of saints is truly social. They work for our well-being, even when we don't even ask or even know what to ask. Lucy seems to reprimand Beatrice for not having acted already. She says, "Why do you not come to the aid of him who loved you, so that for your sake he left the common crowd?" Beatrice says she responded to Lucy's words immediately, but why did she wait until then? Did she not see that what those higher and blessedness did, or was she not moved by what she saw? Notice that Beatrice herself makes no mention of a special relationship with Dante, but only of obeying Lucy. Perhaps Dante's intense devotion to Beatrice was not fully returned. She might not even have been fully aware of it. And although Dante was married to Gemma di Manetto Donati, who bore him several children, the love of his life, his literary muse, and his guiding light was Beatrice Portinari. Her death in 1290 drove Dante to immerse himself in Latin literature. Boethius, Cicero, and most especially Virgil. This dedication to Beatrice was no sordid love affair filled with scandal. He met her when they were children and fell in love with her without having anything that we would call a relationship with her. He would perhaps greet her in the streets and admire her from afar. This might be the reason Beatrice was rather slow to respond. Dante's feelings were not reciprocated and perhaps not even known. The tears in her eyes, on line 116, are the only indication of being particularly moved by Dante's plight. The reason for recounting Virgil's summons is to give Dante the encouragement he needs. What is there to fear when you have 3 such ladies behind you? And this awareness has its desired effect. And Dante says, "So did my weary courage surge again, and such sweet boldness rushed into my heart, I cried out, as a man at last set free." We see here the power of moral support, the power of the communion of saints, the power of hope. This experience of divine assistance is the foundation of real hope. We know what God has done for us in the past. It is this awareness that gives us reason to trust that this help will continue to be with us in the future. God has invested so much in us already that to abandon us now would be unthinkable. Think of the Magnificat or Queen Esther's prayer before entering the presence of King Ahasuerus. Both were facing mortal danger. Our Lady was facing stoning for adultery if St. Joseph rejected her, and Esther, execution for entering the king's presence without being summoned. Both reviewed the blessings God had already granted them in order to prepare their souls, and saying, "The Almighty has done great things for me." So, in time of struggle, when we are tempted to despair and fear, we need to do the same thing. Be grateful